Snow fell mercilessly across the barren Arizona territory, burying everything in silent white. Beneath a broken wagon, Sarah Connelly pulled her children closer, their small bodies trembling with cold and hunger. 3 days without food. No one had stopped. Not the traders, not the settlers, not even the passing cavalry. They simply pretended not to see the widow and her children slowly freezing to death. Then came the shadow. Massive, unmistakable. The Giant of Apache tales stood before them, his dark eyes unreadable as he surveyed their desperate situation. Without a word, he draped a thick buffalo hide across her shoulders and spoke the only English words he knew. "You're coming with me." Could a man feared by everyone become their salvation? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah clutched Emma to her chest, the 5-year-old's face buried against her neck. With her free hand, she gripped Thomas's small fingers, feeling him tremble as they followed the towering Apache through deepening snow. The giant moved with surprising grace despite his massive frame, each step deliberate in the treacherous terrain. "Mama, I'm scared," Thomas whispered, his 7-year-old voice barely audible above the wind. "Hush now," Sarah murmured, squeezing his hand. "We have no choice." 6 months earlier, they'd had choices. A life in Boston. James's smile as he spoke of opportunity in the West. The wagon train that promised community and protection. Then came the fever that took her husband in 3 days, leaving Sarah alone with 2 children and dwindling supplies. The other families had offered condolences but little else before continuing their journey westward. Night was falling fast as they climbed higher into the mountains. Sarah's legs burned with exhaustion. Emma's cough had worsened, each harsh breath sending panic through Sarah's heart. Thomas stumbled beside her, snow reaching his knees. "We need to rest," she called out, her voice swallowed by the wind. The giant turned, dark eyes assessing their condition. He approached, and Sarah instinctively stepped back, pushing Thomas behind her skirts. Instead of reaching for them, the Apache knelt in the snow before Thomas. From within his buckskin shirt, he produced a small wooden horse, intricately carved with flowing mane and alert ears. Thomas's eyes widened. The giant placed it in the boy's palm, closing his small fingers around it. A smile, unexpected and transformative, briefly crossed the Apache's weathered face. "Pony," he said, the English word sounding foreign on his tongue. Thomas looked from the carving to the giant man. "Thank you," he whispered. The giant nodded, then rose to his full height. He pointed toward a distant ridge. "Home," he said. Emma's cough erupted again, her tiny body convulsing. Without warning, the giant reached for her. Sarah cried out, clutching her daughter tighter, but the Apache's expression wasn't threatening. It was concerned. He gestured toward the child, then to himself, miming carrying her. Sarah hesitated. Emma felt dangerously hot against her chest despite the freezing air. Her arms ached from hours of carrying her. Thomas was struggling through the snow beside her. "You won't hurt her?" Sarah asked, knowing he likely didn't understand. The giant placed his hand over his heart, then extended it toward her. A gesture so human, so unmistakable in its sincerity that Sarah found herself slowly transferring Emma to his massive arms. The child looked tiny against his broad chest, but he cradled her with unexpected tenderness. With his free arm, he scooped up Thomas, who clutched his wooden horse tightly. "Follow," he said to Sarah, his deep voice carrying despite the howling wind. The blizzard intensified as they climbed higher. Sarah stumbled more than once, her strength failing. Each time, the giant paused, waiting patiently until she regained her footing. She studied him as they traveled. This man the settlers spoke of in fearful whispers. The giant, they called him, an Apache warrior who stood head and shoulders above others, whose silhouette on a ridge was enough to send soldiers retreating. Yet here he was, carrying her children through a snowstorm, leading them to safety when everyone else had passed them by. Or was it safety? Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrible than the last. She'd heard stories of Apache raids, of captives taken. But as Emma's fever burned and Thomas's strength waned, Sarah realized the bitter truth. Without this man, her children would be dead by morning. As they crested a final ridge, the wind momentarily abated. Through swirling snow, Sarah glimpsed their destination. A sheltered valley where a cabin stood, smoke curling from its chimney. Not a traditional Apache dwelling, but something between two worlds. Like the man himself. The cabin stood nestled against a cliff face, protected from the northern winds. As they approached, Sarah noted the curious blend of construction. Log walls like any settler's home, but the positioning and entrance showed Apache influence. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, promising warmth within. The giant ducked through the doorway, still carrying both children. Sarah followed, momentarily blinded by the transition from white landscape to fire-lit interior. As her eyes adjusted, surprise replaced exhaustion. The single-room dwelling was clean and orderly. Animal pelts covered a raised sleeping platform. Handcrafted furniture. A table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies, spoke of skill and permanence. A fire blazed in a stone hearth, its heat reaching her frozen cheeks. The giant placed Thomas gently on a fur near the fire, then laid Emma down with equal care. The little girl's breathing had become labored, her cheeks flushed with fever. Emma, Sarah knelt beside her daughter, pressing a hand to her forehead. She's burning up. The giant watched intently, then moved to a shelf holding various pouches and clay containers. He selected one, opening it to reveal dried herbs. Sarah tensed as he approached her children again. "What are you doing?" she demanded, positioning herself between him and Emma. The giant paused, considering how to breach the language barrier. He pointed to Emma, then to the herbs, then made a drinking motion. "Medicine," he said the word, carefully pronounced. Sarah hesitated. This man was a stranger, worse, an Apache warrior feared throughout the territory. Yet he had saved them from certain death, had carried her children through impossible conditions, had brought them to this unexpected sanctuary. Emma coughed violently, small body shaking. "Please," Sarah whispered, moving aside. The giant nodded gravely. He took a kettle from near the fire, already steaming with hot water, and added the herbs. While the mixture steeped, he gestured for Sarah to remove Emma's wet clothing. He turned away, giving them privacy while attending to Thomas, who was examining the cabin with curious eyes. Sarah peeled away Emma's frozen layers, wrapping her in a soft rabbit fur blanket the giant had indicated. When the medicine was ready, he demonstrated how to administer it, tipping a small amount into his own mouth first, showing her it was safe. Sarah cradled Emma's head, helping her swallow the bitter liquid. The giant watched intently, his massive frame incongruous with the gentleness of his instructions. As he reached to check Emma's temperature, Sarah noticed a severe burn scar running along his forearm, the skin puckered and discolored. "Thomas, come away from there," Sarah called as her son approached a corner containing various weapons. A bow, quiver of arrows, knife. The giant shook his head, indicating it was acceptable. He crossed to Thomas, kneeling beside him. With deliberate movements, he showed the boy proper respect for the weapons, how to approach them, how not to touch the sharp edges. "See, Mama? He's teaching me," Thomas said, pride evident in his voice. Later, as both children slept near the fire, the giant prepared a simple meal, stew from a pot kept warm at the hearth's edge. He served the children first, rousing them gently to eat, then offered a wooden bowl to Sarah. The stew was rich with meat and unfamiliar roots. Sarah hadn't eaten in days, and despite her lingering fears, hunger overcame caution. The giant sat across from her, his own portion notably smaller than what he'd given her family. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, "for saving us. For this." She gestured to encompass the food, the shelter, the medicine. The giant nodded once, understanding transcending words. Outside, the blizzard raged on. Inside, Emma's breathing steadied as the medicine took effect. Thomas slept with his wooden horse clutched in his hand. And Sarah found herself wondering about the solitary man who lived between two worlds, who had opened his home to strangers when everyone else had turned away. Dawn broke clear and brilliant. Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through oiled paper windows, momentarily disoriented before remembering the events of the previous day. She found herself alone on the sleeping platform, wrapped in furs that smelled of cedar and smoke. Panic flared until she heard Thomas's laugh outside. She rushed to the door, relief flooding through her at the sight of her son kneeling beside the giant in the snow. The Apache was pointing to animal tracks, his massive hand dwarfing Thomas's as he guided the boy's finger along the imprints. "Mama," Thomas called. "I'm learning to track rabbits." Emma sat nearby on a stump, bundled in furs, her cheeks pink but no longer fevered. She clutched a carved wooden bird, studying it with fascination. The giant straightened to his full height as Sarah approached, nodding in greeting. He gestured toward Emma, then to his own forehead, a questioning expression on his weathered face. "She's better," Sarah said. "Thank you." He nodded, understanding her meaning if not her exact words. He beckoned them inside where breakfast awaited, dried berries, strips of jerky, and some kind of porridge. After they'd eaten, the giant retrieved something from a wooden chest, a tattered book with a faded leather cover. He placed it before Sarah. A Spanish-English dictionary, its pages worn thin from handling. "This is how you learned English words," Sarah said, realization dawning. "Few words," he agreed, his deep voice resonant in the small cabin. Sarah opened the dictionary, curious. Certain pages showed more where than others, practical words for trading, for survival. Many had small drawings in the margins, visual aids for associating words with their meanings. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. "I can't keep calling you what they call you." He seemed to understand. "Maka," he said, touching his chest. "Maka," Sarah repeated. "I'm Sarah. These are my children, Thomas and Emma." Maka nodded, testing each name carefully. "Sarah, Thomas, Emma." He pointed to himself. "Apache, Maka." Then he gestured broadly at the land beyond the windows. "Giant," he added with a hint of irony. Using the dictionary and gestures, Maka explained they must remain until spring thaw made the mountain passes safe. Sarah's initial alarm at being trapped faded as she considered their alternatives: certain death in the snow, or tenuous survival here under this man's protection. The day settled into an unexpected rhythm. Sarah began teaching Maka English words beyond his limited vocabulary, while he showed Thomas how to identify plants even beneath the snow. Emma's strength returned gradually, her natural curiosity drawing her to Maka's carving tools, which he carefully supervised her exploring. While the children napped in the afternoon, Sarah sought to understand more about their host. Her questions, simplified for his comprehension, revealed little. He lived alone. He traded occasionally with a settlement 2 days' journey south. He hunted, carved, survived. Restless, Sarah explored the cabin's perimeter while Maka chopped wood. A smaller structure stood behind the main cabin, his workshop, she guessed. The door stood ajar. Curiosity overcame propriety, and she peered inside. Maps covered one wall, military maps, she realized with surprise. Drawings of forts, trails, waterways. Detailed sketches of soldier encampments. On a workbench lay carving tools beside half-finished animals. But it was another drawing that captured her attention. A woman and child, rendered with unexpected tenderness. "Private." Maka's voice behind her made Sarah jump. She turned, apologies forming, but the look on his face stopped her. Not anger, pain. raw and immediate. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping away from the workshop. "I shouldn't have." Maka closed the door firmly, cutting off her view of the drawings. Without meeting her eyes, he walked back to his woodpile, the set of his shoulders communicating more than words could have. Sarah returned to the cabin, questions multiplying. Who was Maka? Why did he have military maps? Who were the woman and child in the drawing? And why did a man feared throughout the territory live alone, caught between two worlds, speaking neither's language fluently? A week passed. Then another. Their daily routines developed a comfortable familiarity. Emma's health improved steadily. Thomas followed Maka everywhere, absorbing knowledge like parched earth drinks rain. Sarah found herself settling into this strange new life, her fear gradually replaced by curiosity, then cautious respect. One morning, Maka examined their food stores with a frown. Though well-stocked, his supplies hadn't been meant for four. He took down his bow and began preparing for a hunt. "I'm coming with you," Sarah said. Maka shook his head. "Dangerous." "I won't be a burden here," Sarah insisted. "I can help. You've taught Thomas so much. Teach me too." Maka studied her, measuring her determination. Finally, he nodded. "Thomas comes. Emma stays." Emma protested but eventually agreed to remain behind after Maka set her up with strips of leather and showed her how to braid them into simple patterns. Sarah arranged the cabin before they left, checking Emma's temperature one last time. Outside, the world glittered. Sunlight transformed the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Maka led them along a game trail, his movements silent despite his size. He stopped frequently, pointing out signs invisible to Sarah's untrained eye. A disturbed patch of snow, bark rubbed from a tree trunk, droppings half-buried. "Life takes life," Maka said carefully, using words they had practiced. "Take only what is needed. Honor what is taken." He showed them how to set snares for rabbits, his massive hands demonstrating the delicate work with surprising dexterity. Thomas absorbed the lesson eagerly, his small fingers mimicking Maka's movements. When Maka offered Sarah his bow, she hesitated. "I wouldn't know how to." "Try," he encouraged. The bow felt awkward in her hands, too large for her frame. Maka positioned himself behind her, adjusting her stance, her grip. Sarah became acutely aware of his proximity, of his breath warming the air near her ear as he explained how to draw the bowstring. His hands enveloped hers, guiding the motion. "Breathe in, hold, release with breath." Sarah followed his instructions, surprised when her arrow flew straighter than expected, striking the tree trunk he'd indicated as a target. "Good," Maka said, approval evident in his voice. Thomas clapped enthusiastically. They continued deeper into the forest. Maka pointed out plants that could be eaten, others that healed wounds or reduced fever. Sarah realized she was being given knowledge that might save their lives when they eventually left this mountain sanctuary. The sudden crack of a gunshot shattered the forest's silence. Maka transformed instantly. His relaxed demeanor vanished, replaced by alertness that bordered on predatory. He crouched, pulling Thomas down beside him, signaling Sarah to do the same. "Go back," he whispered urgently. "Cabin. Emma." "What is it?" Sarah asked, fear clutching at her throat. "Hunters," Maka said grimly. "Not for deer." Another shot rang out, closer this time. Maka's expression hardened. He pointed Sarah toward the cabin, the path they'd followed clearly visible in the snow. "Take Thomas. Go now." "What about you?" "I lead away. Come later." The urgency in his voice brooked no argument. Sarah grabbed Thomas's hand and began retracing their steps, moving as quietly as possible. She glanced back once to see Maka heading in the opposite direction, bow ready, his massive frame somehow blending into the forest despite the snow. They reached the cabin breathless, frightening Emma with their sudden entrance. Sarah barred the door, then watched anxiously through the window, waiting for Maka's return. Hours passed. The winter sun began its early descent. Thomas sat by the door, clutching his wooden horse. Emma had fallen asleep on the furs, exhausted by worry. When Maka finally appeared at the forest's edge, Sarah's relief was so profound it startled her. He moved slowly, favoring his right leg slightly, but otherwise unharmed. That night, after the children slept, Maka explained through his limited English and drawings in the hearth ash. Soldiers, bounty hunters, men who killed Apache for the reward, who wouldn't distinguish between a peaceful native and a raiding party. They hunt the giant, he said, pointing to himself with a grim smile. They hunt me. Sarah studied his face in the firelight. Why do they fear you so much? Maka's expression grew distant. Story for another time. A month passed. Winter tightened its grip on the mountain, sealing them in their shared solitude. Snow piled high around the cabin, transforming it into a warm burrow beneath white drifts. Inside, their lives found rhythm. Mornings began with Maka stoking the fire while Sarah prepared simple meals. Afternoons brought lessons, English words for Maka, survival skills for Sarah and the children. The giant's presence, once intimidating, became reassuring. Sarah noticed how he made himself smaller in the cabin, stooping beneath ceiling beams, sitting cross-legged on the floor to be at eye level with Emma. His hands, capable of drawing a bow that would require two normal men to bend, now gently guided Emma's fingers as she learned to weave strips of leather. One evening, Sarah noticed Maka wincing as he removed his moccasins. The hide was worn through in places, poorly repaired. "Let me," she said, gesturing to his footwear. When he hesitated, she added, "I can fix them. I used to make all our clothes." Maka relinquished the moccasins. Sarah gathered her sewing kit, needle and thread salvaged from her wagon. As she turned the footwear in her hands, something hard pressed against her fingers. Curious, she probed deeper and extracted small metal fragments. "Bullets," she said, looking up at Maka questioningly. His face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of memory. He touched his leg where Sarah had noticed him limping occasionally. "Army," he said simply. Sarah waited, sensing there was or. Maka struggled with the language, reaching for the dictionary, pointing to words: scout, help, betray. Slowly, through broken phrases and gestures, the story emerged. Maka had once served as a scout for the U.S. Army, believing he could help forge peace between his people and the settlers. His tribe had considered him a traitor. The army had eventually betrayed him, as they had betrayed so many treaties. "No home there," he said, pointing east toward Apache lands. "No home there," he added, pointing west toward settler territories. "Only here." Sarah nodded, understanding isolation in a way she hadn't before her husband died. "When James passed," she said, "everyone looked at me differently. Not as Sarah anymore, just as a burden. A widow with children no one wanted to feed." Maka nodded, comprehension in his eyes. As Sarah worked on his moccasins, Emma began crying out in her sleep, nightmares that had become frequent since her father's death. Sarah moved to comfort her, but Maka was already there, his massive frame settling beside the child's sleeping mat. To Sarah's astonishment, he began to sing, a low, melodic Apache lullaby, the words unintelligible but the comfort universal. Emma quieted, turning toward the sound. Maka continued singing, his deep voice barely above a whisper, until her breathing steadied. When he looked up, he found Sarah watching him, something new in her expression. "My daughter," he said, tapping his chest where the pain lived. Before, Sarah didn't need further explanation. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Tracks circled their cabin, not human but mountain lion. Maka showed them safe paths, areas to avoid. "Always together," he instructed. "Never alone." That afternoon, Thomas followed Maka outside to check snares. Sarah watched through the window as the Apache lifted the boy onto his shoulders, pointing out something in the distance. Thomas's laughter drifted back to the cabin, carefree, innocent. It had been months since she'd heard that sound. "Mama," Emma said, tugging at Sarah's skirt. "Is Maka going to be our new papa?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "No, sweetheart. He's helping us until spring. But I like him. Thomas likes him too." Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair. "I know. Don't you like him, Mama?" Sarah glanced out the window again. Maka was teaching Thomas to identify trees by their bark, his patience seemingly endless. "Yes," she admitted quietly, surprised by the truth of it. "I do." The workshop door remained closed after Sarah's intrusion, a boundary she respected. But one afternoon, while gathering firewood, she noticed light within, the door slightly ajar. She hesitated, then peered inside. Maka stood before an easel fashioned from stripped branches, applying pigment to a stretched hide with brushes made from animal hair. The image emerging beneath his hands stole Sarah's breath. A sunset over the valley, rendered with such precision and feeling that she could almost feel the day's last warmth. "Beautiful," she said before she could stop herself. Maka turned, surprised but not angry. After a moment's consideration, he beckoned her inside. The workshop walls displayed his artistry. Landscapes captured in earth pigments. Spiritual scenes blending Apache symbolism with techniques Sarah recognized from Western painting. On a shelf stood clay pots of colored powders, minerals and plants ground into vivid hues. "Who taught you?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the paintings. Maka selected words carefully. "Mission. Father Michael." Before fighting. Through halting phrases, Sarah pieced together his story. A missionary had recognized Maka's talent as a boy, teaching him drawing and painting alongside scripture. The lessons ended when tensions between settlers and Apache escalated into violence. "You continued," Sarah said, admiring a particularly striking image of an eagle in flight. "Beauty remains," Maka replied simply, "even in war." That evening, Thomas developed a high fever, sudden and alarming. The boy's forehead burned beneath Sarah's palm, his small body shivering despite the fire's heat. "Like Emma before," Maka observed, concern deepening the lines around his eyes. Sarah nodded, fear clutching her throat. "But worse." Maka checked his medicine supplies, his expression growing grave. He showed Sarah an empty pouch that had contained the herbs used for Emma's treatment. "Need more," he said. "On mountain." Sarah understood the implication. He would have to venture out, alone in deteriorating weather, to find the medicine Thomas needed. "Too dangerous," she protested. "No choice," Maka replied, echoing her words from their first meeting. He prepared methodically, layering furs, checking weapons. Before leaving, he showed Sarah how to keep Thomas cool, how to prepare pine needle tea for strength. His hand lingered on her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance that affected her more than it should have. "Return before dark," he promised. Hours passed with excruciating slowness. Sarah bathed Thomas's forehead, sang to him, prayed for the first time since James died. The boy's breathing grew labored, his skin flushed with fever. Restless, Sarah explored the cabin, searching for anything that might help. In Maka's absence, she ventured back to his workshop, hoping to find additional medicines. Instead, she discovered a half-finished portrait propped against the wall, turned away from casual view. Her own face looked back at her, rendered with stunning accuracy but also something more. The woman in the painting possessed a strength and beauty Sarah didn't recognize in herself. It was how Maka saw her, she realized with a jolt. Not as a helpless widow, but as something more. Night fell. The promised time of return passed. Snow began falling again, thick flakes that quickly erased tracks and obscured visibility. Sarah stood at the window, scanning the tree line, dread mounting with each passing hour. Thomas moaned in his sleep. Emma huddled close to her brother, her small face pinched with worry. "Maka will come back," she said with a child's certainty. "He promised." Sarah wrapped her arms around both children. "Yes," she said, willing it to be true. "He promised." The night deepened. Wind howled around the cabin corners. Sarah found herself praying not just for Thomas now, but for Maka, for the man who had saved them, who had shown her children kindness when the world had shown them indifference. Near midnight, the cabin door burst open. Maka stumbled inside, snow-covered and limping, but clutching a deerskin pouch. Blood stained the snow melting from his leggings. He had fallen on the treacherous path, injured himself, but continued. "Thomas," he said, moving immediately to the boy despite his own pain. Sarah caught his arm, feeling the cold radiating from him, seeing the exhaustion in his face. "You came back," she whispered. Maka met her gaze. "I promised." Thomas improved gradually. The herbs Maka had risked his life to gather worked slowly but steadily, drawing out the fever. Sarah tended both patients, her son in his sickbed and Maka, whose leg wound had reopened during his desperate journey through the snow. "You shouldn't have gone alone," Sarah said as she cleaned his injury. "No choice," Maka replied, wincing slightly as she applied a poultice of his own making. Outside, the weather worsened. What began as an ordinary snowfall transformed into the fiercest blizzard of the season. Wind screamed down the mountainside, driving snow into every crevice, piling drifts against the cabin walls until the windows were half covered. For 3 days they remained trapped inside. The close quarters, once comfortable, grew confining. Thomas, recovering but weak, became irritable. Emma, forbidden from going outside, whined and complained. The adults, tired from broken sleep and anxiety, found their patience wearing thin. On the 3rd evening, Sarah rummaged through her few possessions, seeking anything to distract the children. Her fingers found the small wooden box at the bottom of her bundle, James's parting gift before the fever took him. "What's that, Mama?" Emma asked, noticing her mother's sudden stillness. Sarah opened the box carefully. A delicate melody filled the cabin, a simple tune rendered in tiny gears and pins. "Your father gave this to me on our wedding day," she said softly. The music drew everyone's attention. Thomas propped himself up on his elbows. Emma clapped with delight. Maka watched, fascinated by the mechanism. "Songs from your people?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "This one is called Greensleeves. It's very old." When the tune finished, Maka surprised them by singing an Apache melody, a hunting song. He explained through gestures and halting English. His deep voice filled the cabin, temporarily drowning out the storm's howl. The evening transformed into an unexpected cultural exchange. Sarah shared songs from Boston, from the wagon train journey west. Maka taught them a simple Apache rhythm, demonstrating how it would be played on drums. The momentary harmony was broken the next morning when Emma accidentally knocked over Maka's medicine pouch, spilling precious herbs across the dirt floor. "Foolish child," Maka snapped, the English phrase clearly one he'd heard from settlers. "Don't speak to her that way," Sarah retorted, pulling Emma close. "Last medicine," Maka said, frustration evident as he carefully gathered what could be salvaged. "She's 5 years old. Should know better. Respect things not hers." Their first real argument erupted, fueled by cabin fever and cultural differences. Sarah retreated to the sleeping platform with Emma. Maka stomped outside despite the storm, returning minutes later covered in snow but calmer. The tension might have festered had disaster not intervened. A thunderous crack preceded the partial collapse of the roof near the chimney, snow and frigid air pouring in through the gap. "Thomas! Emma!" Sarah called, counting heads as Maka instantly moved to protect the children. No one was hurt, but the situation was dire. Cold air rushed in, threatening the fire, endangering them all. Without discussion, they moved into action. Maka climbed onto the roof from outside, braving the storm. Sarah passed him materials from within, branches, hides, anything to seal the breach. They worked together seamlessly, their earlier conflict forgotten in the face of immediate danger. When Maka reached down for another hide, his hand closed over Sarah's. Despite the cold, despite the danger, that momentary contact sent warmth through them both. Their eyes met through the roof gap, something unspoken passing between them. That night, huddled close to preserve heat, Emma asked the question that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "Mama," she whispered, though not quietly enough, "will Maka be our new papa now?" Sarah felt Maka go very still beside them, though he pretended to sleep. The question hung in the air, impossible to answer yet impossible to ignore. "Hush now," Sarah murmured, smoothing her daughter's hair. "That's not something for little girls to worry about." But in the darkness, with the storm finally abating outside, Sarah found herself contemplating possibilities she'd never imagined when a towering Apache had found them dying beneath a broken wagon. The storm passed, leaving behind a crystalline world. Maka ventured out at first light to assess the damage and check his snares. He returned quickly, his expression grave. "Tracks," he said, gesturing for Sarah to follow him outside. In the pristine snow surrounding the cabin, multiple boot prints circled the property. Large men moving with purpose. Maka knelt, examining one set more carefully. "Clayton," he said, almost a whisper. At Sarah's questioning look, he explained through gestures and broken phrases. "A bounty hunter, known for collecting Apache scalps. A man who enjoyed his work." "How many?" Sarah asked, fear knotting her stomach. Maka held up 4 fingers. "Dangerous men." For the next 3 days they lived in tense silence. No fire smoke during daylight. No playing outside for the children. Windows covered. Speaking only in whispers. Sarah caught herself holding her breath whenever footsteps crunched in the snow outside, wondering if this would be the moment their sanctuary was discovered. On the 3rd morning, Thomas grew restless with confinement. While Sarah prepared breakfast and Maka checked the perimeter, the boy slipped outside to retrieve a toy he'd left by the woodpile. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she realized he was missing. She found him outside, happily digging in the snow for his wooden horse. Before she could call him back, Maka materialized beside them, moving with incredible stealth despite his size. "Inside, now," he whispered urgently, eyes scanning the tree line. Too late. A twig snapped in the forest edge. Maka pushed them behind him, reaching for the knife at his belt. For one terrible moment, Sarah was certain they'd been discovered. A deer emerged from the trees, paused to look at them with liquid eyes, then bounded away. That night, Maka made a decision. "Must lead away," he told Sarah as the children slept. "Too close now." "You're leaving us?" Sarah asked, dismayed. "Few days only. Make false trail. Led south. And if they find us while you're gone?" Maka hesitated, then retrieved his rifle from above the door, a Winchester repeater, well-maintained despite its age. "You know guns?" he asked. Sarah nodded. James had insisted she learn, though she'd never fired at anything but bottles and cans. Maka placed the rifle in her hands, showing her how it was loaded, where the extra ammunition was stored. The weight of it, the implied responsibility, terrified Sarah more than the hunters themselves. "I don't want to kill anyone," she whispered. "Hope not needed," Maka replied. "But children." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Before dawn, Maka prepared to leave. He dressed in his lightest moccasins, those Sarah had repaired, and minimal furs for speed. As he gathered his weapons, Sarah impulsively caught his arm. "Be careful," she said. Maka looked down at her hand on his arm, then met her eyes. Something unspoken passed between them, something neither was ready to name. He nodded once, then was gone, slipping into the pre-dawn darkness like a shadow. The first day passed in anxious vigilance. The second dragged with increasing worry. By the third morning, Sarah was fighting panic. Had Maka been captured? Killed? Would they be found next? She was teaching the children quiet word games when a sound outside froze her blood. Approaching footsteps, just one person, moving directly toward the cabin. Sarah grabbed the Winchester, positioning the children behind her, heart hammering against her ribs. The door rattled. Sarah raised the rifle, finger trembling near the trigger. The door swung open. A man stood there, not Maka, but a stranger in a snow-crusted coat. A silver pocket watch chain glinted at his waist, catching the dim light. His eyes widened at the sight of a white woman and children. "Well now," he drawled, recovering quickly. "What have we here?" "The giant's new playthings." Sarah steadied the rifle. "Get out." The man chuckled, seemingly unconcerned by the weapon. "Ma'am, I'm guessing you don't know what that savage is. I'm doing you a favor." "I know exactly who he is," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He saved us when men like you rode past." The hunter's hand moved toward his sidearm. "I'm taking you and those kids back to civilization, willing or not." Sarah fired. The shot went wide, splintering the doorframe. But it was enough. The hunter ducked back, cursing. She heard him retreating, shouting to companions in the distance. They would return, she knew. And Maka was still gone. Maka returned at nightfall, materializing from the darkness like a spirit. Sarah nearly collapsed with relief when his massive frame filled the doorway. The children ran to him, Thomas chattering about the hunter, Emma simply clinging to his leg. "You fired gun," Maka said, concern evident as he checked them for injuries. Sarah nodded, explaining the encounter in halting phrases. Maka's expression darkened when she described the silver watch. "Clayton," he confirmed grimly. "They camp below. For men. Many guns. What do we do now?" Maka seemed to reach a decision. "Show you something." After ensuring the children were asleep, he retrieved a small bundle wrapped in soft deerskin from beneath a loose floorboard. With reverence, he unwrapped a beaded necklace. Intricate Apache craftsmanship, the colors still vibrant despite obvious age. "My wife," he said simply. Sarah touched the beadwork gently. "It's beautiful." Maka nodded, pain etched in the lines around his eyes. Using the dictionary and gestures, he began sharing his full history. The story emerged slowly, pieced together across language barriers. Maka had been respected among his people, a warrior known for wisdom as well as strength. When army representatives approached seeking scouts who knew the territory, Maka had volunteered, believing cooperation might prevent bloodshed. Thought helped both sides. Bring peace. Some in his tribe had called him traitor. But Maka had extracted promises of protection for his family's encampment. His wife, Natala, and their young daughter, Kimmy. Captain gave word. Word broken. While Maka was guiding soldiers to water sources, another army unit attacked his family's camp. The official report called it a mistake. Maka knew better. "No mistake," he said, his voice hollow. "Medals given." Natala and Kimmy had been killed along with 17 others. Maka, returning to find his world destroyed, had gone temporarily mad with grief. He'd tracked the responsible soldiers one by one, not killing. He took no scalps, claimed no bounties, but hunting them, terrifying them, becoming the specter that haunted their nightmares. "Became giant," he said, meeting Sarah's eyes. "Became what they feared." Eventually, he'd withdrawn to this remote valley, caught between worlds, belonging to neither. The army still considered him a threat. His own people viewed him as an outcast. He survived, traded occasionally, avoided both sides of a conflict that had already taken everything he loved. "Why tell me this now?" Sarah asked softly. "Clayton comes for Giant. You should know why." Sarah understood the unspoken message. If anything happened to Maka, she needed to understand who he really was, not the monster of settler campfire tales. "I lost James to fever," Sarah said, sharing her own pain in return. "It was quick. 3 days of burning, then gone. The wagon train couldn't wait. They gave us a day to bury him, then moved on. No one wanted the burden of a widow with 2 young children." She described how they'd fallen further behind each day, how supplies dwindled, how passing travelers would avert their eyes rather than help. "When you found us," she continued, "I thought it was just another kind of death waiting. Now?" Maka asked, his deep voice gentle. Sarah met his gaze directly. "Now I know it was life. Waiting." Something shifted between them, a boundary crossed. Maka reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. His massive hand cradled her cheek with incongruous tenderness. "Sarah," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. A log shifted in the fire, sending up sparks. The moment broke. Maka withdrew his hand, but something had changed irrevocably. Sarah felt it in the air between them, in the way he looked at her now without hiding his feelings. Thomas stirred in his sleep, mumbling incoherently. Sarah moved to check on him, tucking the blanket more securely around his shoulders. When she turned back, Maka was securing the cabin door, his expression unreadable. But she had seen what lived in his heart now, and recognized it as a mirror of what had begun growing in her own. Dawn brought fresh snow and a sense of foreboding. Maka studied the valley through a small gap in the window coverings, his body tense with vigilance. "Today they come," he said with quiet certainty. Sarah tightened her arms around Emma. "How do you know?" "Smoke rising wrong place, making camp closer." The preparations began immediately. Maka gathered essential supplies, food, blankets, weapons, into packs small enough for Sarah and Thomas to carry. He instructed them to wear extra layers, preparing for extended time outdoors. "Where will we go?" Sarah asked. "Place I show you now. Secret place." Maka led them through the back of the cabin, moving cautiously through the trees until they reached the frozen waterfall Sarah had glimpsed from a distance. What had appeared to be solid ice concealed a narrow passage, a hidden cave entrance behind the cascade. Inside, the temperature rose noticeably. The cave extended deep into the mountain, illuminated by Maka's torch. Sarah gasped as the flickering light revealed ancient paintings covering the walls. Handprints, animal figures, abstract symbols in red and black and ochre. "My ancestors," Maka explained, touching one image reverently. "Many generations. Sacred place." "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, genuine awe in her voice. Emma approached the wall cautiously, reaching toward a painted horse. "Can I touch?" Maka nodded. Gently, with respect. The cave system extended further than Sarah expected, branching into multiple chambers. One held a small spring of clear water. Another contained stored supplies, evidence of Maka's long-term planning for emergencies. "You've prepared for this," Sarah observed. "Always prepare," Maka agreed. "Always have escape." In the largest chamber, Maka built a small, smokeless fire. As they warmed themselves, he began telling stories about the cave paintings, the great buffalo hunt depicted near the entrance, the coming of horses shown deeper within, the story of how Spider-Woman taught the Apache to weave. Emma and Thomas listened, entranced by tales so different from the stories of their Boston childhood. Sarah found herself equally captivated, not just by the stories themselves but by the animation in Maka's normally stoic face as he shared his heritage. Thomas, emboldened by Maka's openness, began sharing his own memories, fishing with his father, the voyage west by wagon, the Christmas celebrations in their small Boston home. "Tell more about Boston," Maka encouraged, genuine interest in his expression. Sarah joined in, describing cobblestone streets, church bells on Sunday mornings, harbor ships bringing goods from distant lands. The sharing of worlds continued as daylight faded beyond the cave entrance, creating an unexpected moment of peace amid their precarious situation. The moment shattered with the distant sound of men's voices echoing through the forest. Maka immediately extinguished the fire. "They find cabin," he whispered. Through a hidden vantage point near the cave entrance, they watched as 4 men approached the cabin. Clayton, distinguishable by his silver watch chain glinting in the winter sun, directed the others to surround the structure. When they determined it was empty, they began ransacking it methodically. Thomas clenched his fists. "They're ruining our home," he whispered fiercely. Sarah was startled by his choice of words, "our home," but realized the truth in them. Somehow, in these strange months of winter isolation, Maka's cabin had become home in a way their Boston house never was after James died. Maka guided them deeper into the cave system as darkness fell completely. He had prepared a secondary shelter in a chamber far from the entrance, furs arranged on a natural stone shelf, dried food stored in leather pouches, water collected from the spring. The close quarters meant they huddled together for warmth. Emma fell asleep quickly, exhausted by fear and excitement. Thomas resisted longer, insisting he needed to help keep watch, before finally succumbing to slumber mid-sentence. In the dim glow of the single candle Maka permitted, Sarah found herself inches from him, their shoulders touching, Emma sleeping between them. The intimate proximity, the shared danger, the revelations of the previous night, all combined to create a charged silence. "Maka," Sarah whispered, not entirely certain what she wanted to say. He turned toward her. Their faces were so close she could feel his breath, warm against her cheek. His hand moved toward hers in the darkness. Emma whimpered in her sleep, a nightmare breaking the moment before it could fully form. 3 days passed in the cave's refuge. The bounty hunters maintained a presence in the valley, using Maka's cabin as their base, sending out search parties that sometimes passed frighteningly close to the hidden entrance. Each excursion outside for water or to check the perimeter carried risk, but Maka moved like a ghost through his territory, always returning safely. On the 4th morning, Sarah noticed subtle changes in the air, a certain softness, a different quality to the light filtering through cracks in the cave ceiling. "Spring coming," Maka confirmed when she mentioned it. "Snow melts soon. Passes open." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. When they'd first arrived at Maka's cabin, months earlier, the understanding had been clear. They would remain until spring thaw made travel possible, then continue their journey westward. But now, while Maka taught Thomas tracking signs near the cave entrance, Sarah explored the storage chamber, taking in inventory of their supplies. Behind a stack of dried meat, she discovered a rolled deerskin, a map she realized as she carefully unfurled it. The markings showed their mountain, the surrounding territories, and a route continuing far westward, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Notes in Maka's careful hand, mixing English and Apache words, marked water sources, dangerous areas, safe trading posts. "California," Maka's voice came from behind her. Sarah startled, not having heard him approach. "You're planning to leave?" she asked, a strange hollowness opening in her chest at the thought. Maka nodded slowly. "Too many hunters now. Too dangerous here." "When?" "When passes clear. 2 weeks, maybe less." Sarah studied the map again, noting how meticulously it was crafted, how much preparation it represented. "How long have you been planning this?" "Many seasons," Maka admitted. "Each year, say next year. Each year stay." "Why California?" "Places there where Apache live in peace. Mixed villages. Not all white men hate." Sarah traced the route with her fingertip, imagining the journey, arduous, dangerous, but leading to possibility. "And now," Maka took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Sarah," he said, her name still sounding new on his lips. "Come with me." The directness of it stunned her. "What?" "You, Thomas, Emma. Come to California. With me. Maka, I. New life there. For all. Together. The word hung in the air. Together. Not as reluctant companions thrown together by desperate circumstances, but by choice. As a family. Thomas's voice interrupted them. Yes? The boy exclaimed, appearing in the chamber entrance. He'd clearly been listening. Mama, please. I want to stay with Maka. Thomas, it's not that simple. Why not? Her son demanded. A stubborn set to his jaw that reminded Sarah painfully of James. Maka teaches me things. Important things. And he keeps us safe. What about Emma? Sarah asked. This is a decision that affects all of us. Emma loves him too, Thomas insisted. You know she does. Sarah couldn't deny it. Her daughter had blossomed under Makara's gentle attention, overcoming her initial shyness to follow him like a second shadow. And you, Mama? Thomas pressed. Don't you care about him too? Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thomas, that's not. Sarah, Maka interrupted softly. I understand fear. New place. Different life. He gestured to himself, to the obvious differences between them. Not easy. Their eyes met, and in his, Sarah saw everything he couldn't fully express in English: hope, longing, uncertainty. The same emotions churning within her own heart. Before she could respond, they heard Emma's frightened cry from the main chamber. They rushed toward the sound, finding the little girl pointing toward the cave entrance. Men coming, she whispered urgently. With guns. Through the narrow observation slit, they saw Clayton and his hunters approaching the waterfall, following tracks Maka had carefully tried to conceal. One hunter pointed directly at the hidden entrance, gesturing excitedly to the others. They found us, Sarah breathed. Deeper, Maka ordered, already gathering essentials. Second exit. As they retreated further into the mountain, Sarah realized their time for careful deliberation had run out. Whatever decision she made would have to be now, under pressure, with their very survival at stake. The second cave exit opened onto a narrow ledge halfway up the mountain's eastern face. Maka led them along precarious paths, supporting Emma when the footing grew treacherous, guiding Thomas over difficult sections. Sarah followed, heart pounding, aware that a single misstep meant disaster. Behind them, voices echoed from the cave. Clayton's men had found their sanctuary. They had perhaps minutes before the hunters discovered the second exit and their trail. They reached a sheltered hollow as twilight descended. Maka quickly constructed a rudimentary blind from branches and snow, concealing them from casual observation. As the children huddled together for warmth, he and Sarah conferred in urgent whispers. We need to reach the northern pass, Sarah suggested, remembering the map. Make for the trading post on the other side. Maka shook his head. Too far. Children cannot travel so fast. Then what do we do? Maka's expression was grim. I lead them away. You take children to old trapper cabin. He sketched directions in the snow. 2 hours walk. Safe there. Separate? No. We stay together. No choice, Maka insisted. Clayton never stops hunting. Must end this. Their whispered argument grew heated. Sarah advocated finding authorities, explaining their situation, trusting in justice. Maka's bitter laugh held years of experience with what passed for justice when Apache were involved. No law for me, he said flatly. Only law for them. Dawn was breaking when they heard it. Thomas's wooden horse, carved by Maka's own hands, clattered onto the stone before their hiding place. A voice called from below. We know you're up there, Giant. We've got something you want. Sarah's blood froze. She lunged toward the edge of their shelter, but Maka caught her arm. Careful, he whispered. Trick maybe. Peering cautiously around the blind, they saw Clayton standing in a clearing below, flanked by his 3 companions. One held Thomas, a hand clamped firmly over the boy's mouth, a knife at his throat. "No," Sarah moaned. "How?" "He was just—" She turned to find Emma trembling alone in the back of their shelter. Thomas must have crept out while they argued, perhaps trying to scout as Maka had taught him. "One savage for one boy," Clayton shouted. "Fair trade, wouldn't you say? Come down alone, Giant, or we start sending the kid back in pieces." Maka's face transformed, ancient fury burning in his eyes. Sarah clutched his arm. "They'll kill you both," she whispered desperately. "Have plan," Maka replied, his voice deadly calm. "But need your help." For the next hour, as Clayton grew increasingly impatient below, they prepared. Maka taught Sarah more advanced Apache fighting techniques, where to strike, how to move silently, how to use the environment as weapon and shield. She absorbed everything with fierce concentration, fear for Thomas overriding all else. "I'm coming for you," she whispered toward her captive son. A promise carried on. The mountain wind. "Clayton," Maka finally called down. "Coming now. No tricks. Alone," the hunter shouted back. "Or the boy dies." Before descending, Maka turned to Sarah. 3 days, he said. "If not back, take Emma to California." He pressed a small pouch into her hand, enough gold dust to fund their journey. "Promise." Sarah felt tears freezing on her cheeks. "I promise. But you're coming back. Both of you." Maka touched her face gently. "Emma hidden safe," he reminded her, having concealed the girl in a small cave behind their position. "Wait until dark. Then go." Impulsively, Sarah pulled him down to her, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was brief but filled with everything they hadn't said. Fear, hope, newfound love. When they separated, Maka's eyes held a new light. "Now have reason to return," he said softly. Sarah watched him descend toward Clayton, hands raised in apparent surrender. She noted how he positioned himself, how he assessed each hunter's position, looking for weaknesses. Despite his size, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator. "I'm here," she heard him call to Thomas. "No fear, brave one." Clayton laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the mountain air. The giant himself, caught at last, and all it took was one little boy. As darkness fell and Emma slept fitfully beside her, Sarah prepared for her part in Maka's plan. She checked the knife he'd given her, secured her hair beneath a dark cloth, and painted her face with mud for camouflage. Tomorrow, Clayton would learn why it was dangerous to threaten a mother's child, and the man she had come to love. Sarah stood at the edge of Copper Springs, heart pounding beneath the fine dress she'd recovered from her original wagon supplies. With her hair properly arranged and face scrubbed clean, she looked every inch the respectable Eastern lady, a far cry from the woman who had spent months in an Apache dwelling, learning to track and hunt. Emma remained safely hidden in the trapper's cabin Maka had directed them to, cared for by an elderly native woman who owed Maka a debt. Sarah hated leaving her daughter, but a child would draw attention, and she needed to move freely through the settlement. The town consisted of one main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, saloon, a sayer's office, and small jail. Sarah approached confidently, embodying the persona she'd crafted. A wealthy widow awaiting escort to California, delayed by illness in this backwater town. At the general store, she purchased supplies they didn't need, chatting amicably with the shopkeeper's wife. "Heard there was some excitement yesterday," Sarah mentioned casually. "Something about an Apache?" The woman leaned closer. "They caught the giant, brought him in just before sunset. He's locked up tight in the jail with some boy they found with him." Sarah's heart leapt. Thomas was alive and in town. A boy? Why would they detain a child? Sheriff says the Apache kidnapped him. Poor thing must be traumatized, living with that savage. Sarah bit her tongue. How dreadful. Where are they holding them? Jail, end of the street. Army captain's taken charge. Says the giant's a military matter. They're moving them to the fort tomorrow. The news shortened their timeline dangerously. Sarah thanked the woman and continued her reconnaissance, circling the jail from a safe distance. The building was small but solid, log construction with barred windows and a single entrance guarded by a bored-looking soldier. Through a side window, she glimpsed Thomas sitting on a bench, apparently unharmed. No sign of Maka. In the saloon, loosened tongues provided more information. The giant had surrendered without resistance. Suspicious behavior that had the hunters on edge. Captain Hayes, the army officer who'd taken charge, had a personal vendetta against the Apache. And most importantly, the cell keys hung on a hook behind the jail desk, overseen by a single guard at night. Sarah was returning to her reconnaissance when she nearly collided with Clayton himself, exiting the saloon. His eyes narrowed, studying her face. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "Don't believe I've seen you before." "I'm just passing through," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "Awaiting escort to California." Clayton fingered his silver watch chain thoughtfully. "Something familiar about you." Sarah's pulse raced. She'd fired at this man in Maka's cabin. Had he seen her clearly enough to recognize her? "I'm told I have a common face," she said lightly. "Good day, sir." She moved away quickly, not running but walking with purpose, feeling his eyes on her back. When she dared glance back, Clayton had rejoined his companions, but he was pointing in her direction, still watching. Behind the stables, Sarah found an unexpected ally, the store owner, Mr. Fleming, who approached her cautiously. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I believe you might be the woman staying with Maka." Sarah tensed, ready to flee. "Don't worry," Fleming continued. "He saved my life twice, guided me when I was lost, healed my boy when the doctor gave up. I owe him. Why help me? It's dangerous. Because they're calling him a kidnapper and worse, but I've known him 5 years. He trades fair, keeps to himself. Whatever they say he is, I've seen different." Fleming revealed that others in town had similar experiences with Maka, a trapper he'd rescued from a blizzard, a family whose wagon he'd helped repair, a child he'd found lost in the forest and returned safely. The giant's fearsome reputation existed alongside quiet stories of unexpected kindness. "I can create a distraction tomorrow morning," Fleming offered. "When they transfer them. Nothing that'll trace back to me, but enough to thin the guards." Sarah clasped his hand gratefully. "Thank you." As darkness fell, she made her way to the ridge overlooking town, where Maka had instructed her to wait. A shadow detached itself from the trees. One of the Apache allies Maka had somehow summoned through signal fires before his capture. "All prepared," the man whispered in broken English. "Dawn tomorrow." Sarah nodded, determination hardening within her. Boston society would have been scandalized by what she was planning. But that woman, the proper widow, the obedient daughter, the conventional mother, had died slowly during the months in Maka's cabin. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who would fight with every Apache trick she'd learned to save her son, and the man who had become essential to her survival in ways that went far beyond the physical. Dawn broke with a commotion at the saloon, a brawl that quickly escalated into gunfire and shouts. As promised, Fleming had created his distraction. 2 of the guards stationed outside the jail rushed toward the chaos, leaving only one man at the door. Sarah waited in the shadowed alley behind the jail, dressed now in dark clothing, her face smudged with dirt to dull its paleness. She moved precisely as Maka had taught her, rolling her weight from heel to toe, breathing silently through her nose, using peripheral vision to monitor movement. The rear of the jail had a single window, too small for Maka's broad shoulders but large enough for Thomas or herself. The bars looked solid, but Fleming's information had proven accurate. They were anchored in aging wood, not stone. As she worked to loosen the window frame with a pry bar Fleming had provided, she heard voices inside. "Move away from the boy, savage." Cold, authoritative voice, Captain Hayes, she presumed. "No, harm him." Maka's deep voice, calm despite the circumstances. You'll hang for what you've done, Giant. Kidnapping settlers, murdering soldiers. I've waited a long time for this. Sarah worked faster, feeling the wood splinter around the bar mounts. Inside, she could see Thomas pressed against the bars of the cell, watching wide-eyed as the captain circled Maka like a predator. Never took women, Maka said evenly. Never killed who didn't try kill me first. Hayes laughed bitterly. Tell that to the families of the men you hunted down, to the women you stole. You know truth, Maka replied, and something in his tone made Hayes pause. You know what happened at Eagle Creek. The captain's face hardened. I know you turned against the army that trusted you. That makes you a traitor. You ordered attack on peaceful camp. Women, children, my family. They were hostiles harboring renegades. Hayes snapped, but uncertainty flickered across his face. I had my orders. Gave yourself orders, Maka countered. Then lied, took credit, took medals. Sarah finally worked the bars loose enough to slide them from their fittings. The opening would be tight but manageable. She waited for her moment as the argument inside intensified. Mama! Thomas suddenly exclaimed, spotting her through the window. Hayes whirled, reaching for his sidearm. Sarah launched herself through the window, landing in a crouch as Maka had taught her. In the same motion, she flung a handful of the pepper and ash mixture Fleming had provided, catching Hayes full in the face. The captain reeled backward, temporarily blinded. The lone guard rushed in from the front room, drawn by the commotion. Maka reached through the cell bars, catching the man's arm as he passed, wrenching it with enough force to send him crashing into the wall. The guard slumped unconscious, his keys clattering to the floor. Sarah? Maka breathed, relief and admiration mingling in his voice. She snatched the keys, fumbling with the unfamiliar lock. Are you hurt? Thomas. We're okay, Mama. Thomas assured her, pressing against the cell door eagerly. The lock finally clicked open. Thomas burst out, throwing himself into her arms. Maka emerged more cautiously, immediately retrieving his confiscated weapons from a wall rack. Hayes was recovering, wiping streaming eyes with his sleeve. You, he snarled at Sarah. You're helping this savage? This savage saved my children when your soldiers rode past us dying in the snow, Sarah retorted. He's a better man than you'll ever be. The captain lunged for his fallen pistol. Maka moved with astonishing speed for his size, kicking the weapon away, then pinning Hayes against the wall with one massive forearm. Give me reason, Maka growled, knife raised. One reason. Sarah saw the struggle in his eyes, years of pain, of justified hatred, demanding satisfaction. She touched his arm gently. Maka, not like this, not in front of Thomas. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't listen. Then, with visible effort, Maka lowered the knife. Instead, he tore open Hayes' uniform jacket, revealing a leather-bound journal in the inner pocket. Maka tossed it to Sarah. His orders, his lies, names of women, children killed, all written. Sarah opened it, scanning quickly. The evidence was damning: falsified reports, private admissions of unauthorized attacks, a list of native casualties dismissed as necessary collateral. You won't escape, Hayes spat. Clayton and his men will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Shouts from outside indicated the distraction at the saloon was ending. Their time was running out. We need to go, Sarah urged. Now. Maka bound and gagged Hayes, securing him in the cell they'd just vacated. As they prepared to leave through the rear window, the jail's front door burst open. Clayton stood in the doorway, recognition dawning as he saw Sarah's face. It's you, he said, reaching for his gun. The woman from the cabin. Maka moved with lightning speed, shoving Thomas and Sarah behind him as Clayton fired. The bullet splintered the wooden beam beside them. Before the hunter could fire again, Maka hurled his knife with deadly accuracy, striking Clayton's shoulder. The man howled, dropping his pistol. "Go!" Maka ordered, pushing Sarah toward the window. "Mountain path." Sarah helped Thomas through the narrow opening, then squeezed through herself. Maka followed, his broad shoulders barely fitting, tearing his shirt as he forced himself out. Clayton's shouts had alerted the town. Men poured from the saloon and stores, grabbing weapons. Maka led them through back alleys, moving with purpose toward the eastern hills where Emma waited. Behind them, horses neighed as a pursuit party hastily assembled. They reached the trapper's cabin by mid-morning. Emma flung herself into Sarah's arms, then Thomas's, tears of relief streaming down her face. The old native woman who'd watched over her melted away into the forest without a word. "No time," Maka said, gathering essential supplies. "They follow soon." Their only advantage was Maka's intimate knowledge of the terrain. He led them along hidden game trails, through narrow passes barely visible to the untrained eye. By afternoon they'd reached the mountain saddle that separated Copper Springs territory from the route to California. Up there, Maka pointed to a rocky outcropping overlooking the pass. Defensible position. They'd barely established themselves among the boulders when the first riders appeared below. Clayton had assembled a formidable party, 8 men, including his original companions. Hayes was notably absent, presumably still locked in his own jail. Maka positioned them carefully, Sarah with his rifle covering the eastern approach, Thomas stationed as lookout on their flank, Emma secured in a protected hollow at the center of their position. He moved constantly between them, checking sight lines, adjusting their cover. "They come soon," he told Sarah quietly. "Stay hidden. Shoot only if no choice." The confrontation began with Clayton's voice echoing up from below. "We know you're up there, Giant. There's no escape this time." Maka remained silent, watching as the hunters spread out, seeking routes up the rocky slope. "The woman and children can walk away," Clayton continued. "Our quarrel's not with them." Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. "Liar," she whispered. The first hunter appeared on their level, circling wide to approach from the west. Thomas, proving his worth as lookout, spotted him immediately and alerted Maka with the bird call they'd practiced. The Apache moved silently through the rocks, disappearing from Sarah's view. Moments later, she heard a brief scuffle, then silence. The hunter didn't reappear. Clayton, growing impatient, began ascending directly, using boulders for cover. 2 more hunters followed different routes. "Thomas," Sarah whispered urgently. "Your bow." The boy nodded, understanding immediately. Using the small bow Maka had crafted for him, he sent an arrow arcing high over a hunter's position. The man glanced up instinctively, momentarily distracted, enough for Maka to neutralize him with a swift, silent blow. One by one, the hunters were separated and subdued. But Clayton proved more cunning. He worked his way around to their eastern flank, appearing suddenly on a ledge above Sarah's position. "Found you," he snarled, aiming his rifle. Sarah fired without hesitation, her shot going wide but forcing Clayton to duck. As he recovered, Maka launched himself at the hunter, driving them both away from Sarah's position. They grappled at the edge of the precipice, locked in desperate combat. Sarah scrambled to help, but another hunter appeared, cutting off her route. Trapped, she raised the now empty rifle defensively. The hunter laughed, advancing confidently. "Your Apache can't help you now, lady." A small figure darted from the rocks. Thomas, wielding a stone with grim determination. He struck the hunter's knee, causing him to stumble. Sarah seized the moment, swinging the rifle but with all her strength, connecting solidly with the man's temple. He crumpled without a sound. "Thomas, back to Emma," Sarah ordered, turning toward Maka's struggle with Clayton. The 2 men fought savagely, blood staining both their faces. Clayton had drawn a knife, slashing wildly at the larger man. Maka, though wounded, maintained his advantage until Clayton landed a desperate blow to his injured leg. The Apache faltered, giving Clayton the opening to kick him backward toward the cliff edge. "Maka!" Sarah screamed, raising the hunter's dropped pistol. Clayton whirled at her voice. "You'd shoot a white man to save a savage?" He spat in disbelief. "Without hesitation," Sarah replied, her aim steady. The sound of horses approaching from below distracted them all. The remaining hunters were retreating, shouting about an Apache war party. Clayton glanced down, then back at Sarah, calculating his odds. "This isn't over," he growled, backing away. "It is for you," came Maka's voice as he regained his footing. "No more hunting. No more killing." Clayton's face twisted with hatred. There's always more killing where savages are concerned. He lunged one final time, not at Maka but at Sarah. The shot echoed across the mountain. Not from Sarah's gun, but from below. Clayton staggered, looking down in shock at the spreading crimson stain on his chest, then toppled over the cliff edge. Sarah rushed to the cliff edge, peering down at the body sprawled on the rocks below. Clayton lay motionless, the silver watch chain glinting in the late afternoon sun. On the trail beneath, Fleming stood with a smoking rifle, flanked by 3 others, townspeople who had witnessed Hayes' cruelty and Clayton's obsession firsthand. "He won't trouble you again," Fleming called up. "The others are running back to town with quite a tale about Apache warriors descending from the hills." "There are no warriors," Sarah called back, confused. Fleming grinned. "They saw what fear told them to see. A few native traders I asked to circle the mountain making noise. It'll keep the army busy looking in the wrong direction while you get clear." Maka raised his hand in solemn thanks. Fleming nodded once, then led his companions back toward Copper Springs. They would report that Clayton died pursuing dangerous outlaws, a truth of sorts that would satisfy the authorities. The confrontation had left Maka severely wounded. A deep knife gash crossed his ribs, and his injured leg had reopened. He dismissed Sarah's concerns, insisting they put more distance between themselves and potential pursuit before tending to his injuries. They traveled north until nightfall, finding shelter in a protected valley near a small stream. Only then did Maka allow Sarah to examine his wounds. "Bad?" he asked as she cleaned the gash on his side. "Bad enough," Sarah replied, her hands gentle but efficient. "You're fortunate it didn't go deeper." She worked methodically, applying poultices of herbs gathered along their route, knowledge Maka had shared during their winter together. Thomas kept watch proudly, taking his role as protector seriously. Emma gathered kindling for a small, smokeless fire, demonstrating skills that would have been unimaginable to the timid girl who had huddled beneath a broken wagon months earlier. As Sarah finished bandaging Maka's wounds, he caught her hand in his. "You fought well," he said softly, "like Apache warrior." "I had a good teacher," she replied, a smile touching her lips despite their precarious situation. They remained in the valley for a week, allowing Maka to heal and planning their journey west. The mountain spring had fully arrived, bringing warm days and wildflowers that carpeted the meadows. Emma collected blossoms, weaving them into crowns for everyone. Thomas practiced his tracking skills daily, bringing back news of deer paths and rabbit warrens. One evening, Thomas approached Sarah with a folded piece of deerskin. "I made something," he said, uncharacteristically shy. Sarah unfolded the skin to find a drawing rendered in charcoal, for figures standing together. Maka towered over the others, his hand resting on Thomas's shoulder. Sarah stood beside him, holding Emma's hand. Despite the primitive technique, the emotion was unmistakable, a family portrait. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, embracing her son. "Are we a family now?" Thomas asked directly. "With Maka." Before Sarah could formulate a response, Emma joined them. "I want Maka to be our new papa," she declared with a child's certainty. Sarah glanced toward the stream where Maka was checking his fish traps, unaware of the conversation. It's complicated, children. The world out there. She gestured vaguely eastward. They don't understand people like Maka. They fear what they don't understand. We're not going back there, Thomas said firmly. We're going to California. Sarah studied her son's resolute expression, recognizing James's determination and something new. An inner strength forged through their winter with Maka. That night, after the children slept, Maka and Sarah sat beside the dying embers of their fire. He was healing well, moving with increasing ease, the pain lines around his eyes softening. Children ask if you are family now, he said quietly, startling her. You heard. Maka nodded. Apache ears. A faint smile touched his lips. What you tell them? Sarah gazed into the glowing coals. I don't know what to tell them. Part of me wants to say yes. Another part is afraid. Of me? No, she said firmly. Never that. I'm afraid of the world. Of what it would mean for you, for them, for us. Maka considered her words. Then, with ceremonial solemnity, he removed a small pouch from around his neck. From it, he extracted a pinch of red ochre, mixed it with a drop of water on his palm, and drew his finger across her forehead in a straight line. Apache blessing, he explained, for family, for protection. He repeated the gesture on his own forehead. Now we match, he said simply. The intimacy of the moment, the acceptance of her and her children into his protection, moved Sarah deeply. Without words, she leaned against his uninjured side, feeling his arm encircle her shoulders. They sat in companionable silence until Maka spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. California has places where Apache and white live together. Not easy, not perfect, but possible. Is that enough? Sarah asked. Just possible? Maka considered. Possible is beginning. Rest we make ourselves. 6 weeks later, the family stood on Maka's mountain, preparing to leave. The cabin had been restored after Clayton's destruction. Not for their use, but as Maka explained, for next people needing shelter. Spring had fully established itself. The snow line had retreated up the mountain, wildflowers carpeted the valley, and game trails teemed with new life. Their packs were ready, light enough to carry long distances, containing only essentials and a few precious keepsakes. Maka moved through the cabin one final time, checking that everything was in order. He'd replenished the firewood, left dried meat sealed against rodents, and repaired the damage from winter storms. In each room, he paused briefly, as if saying farewell to a faithful friend. Outside, Sarah watched him perform an Apache blessing ceremony around the cabin's perimeter. He moved solemnly, speaking words she couldn't understand but whose meaning she felt deeply: gratitude, protection, continuity. At the threshold, he used red ochre to mark a symbol above the door. What does it mean? Sarah asked. Safe passage, Maka translated. Welcome to those in need. Warning to those with bad hearts. Thomas and Emma had already said their goodbyes to the spaces that had sheltered them through the winter. The sleeping platform where they'd huddled during blizzards, the hearth where Maka had taught them to carve, the table where they'd shared meals and stories. As Maka completed his ritual, Sarah found herself unexpectedly emotional. This isolated cabin had witnessed profound transformation. Her children's growth, her own evolution from desperate widow to capable survivor, and most surprisingly, the birth of feelings she'd never expected to experience again after James's death. Ready? Maka asked, shouldering his pack. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She adjusted Emma's small pack, checked Thomas's walking stick, and took her place beside Maka. They descended the mountain path in single file, Maka leading, Thomas behind him mimicking his careful footsteps, Emma next with determined concentration, and Sarah bringing up the rear, occasionally glancing back at the diminishing cabin. At the valley's edge, Where the western trail began in earnest, Maka stopped. From his pack, he removed James's pocket watch, the one Sarah had given him when they formalized their commitment to travel together. "Sun tells time better," he said with gentle humor, checking the watch's position against the morning light. "But good to remember." Sarah understood his deeper meaning. They carried their pasts with them, not as burdens but as foundations for what they were building together. James would always be her children's father, just as Natala and Kimmy would always be the first family of Maka's heart. These truths didn't diminish what they had found with each other, but honored the paths that had brought them to this moment. The trail stretched before them, months of travel across territories both promising and perilous. They would face challenges. Maka had warned them honestly. Not everyone in California would accept their unconventional family, but there were communities where they might find acceptance. Mixed settlements of natives and settlers who had chosen cooperation over conflict. "Will we ever come back?" Emma asked, looking toward the mountain that had been their sanctuary. "Perhaps," Maka replied. "Mountain remains. Waits if needed." Thomas pointed excitedly toward the western horizon. "Look how far you can see. Are those the mountains we'll cross to reach California?" "First mountains of many," Maka confirmed. "Long journey." Sarah studied their faces in the morning light, her children's excitement, Maka's quiet confidence. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate widow facing certain death beneath a broken wagon. Now she stood beside a man society had taught her to fear, embarking on a journey few would understand or approve. The irony wasn't lost on her. Maka's first English words to her had been a command, "You're coming with me," words that had terrified her then. Now, as they took their first steps westward together, those same words felt like a promise, freely given and joyfully accepted. Maka extended his hand. Sarah laced her fingers through his, feeling the strength in his grip, the tenderness in his touch. Emma skipped ahead on the trail, sunlight catching in her hair. Thomas walked tall beside them, wooden bow strapped to his back, already scanning the path ahead as Maka had taught him. They moved forward together, not looking back, a family forged in winter's crucible, stepping into spring's uncertain promise.